Welcome to Life Expansion After 50. This week's episode focuses on the action step, and more importantly, the space between response and action. In everyday terms, we often think of a response and an action as one and the same. But I'm making a critical distinction here. The response answers the question, what should I do? The action answers the questions, how should I do it, when should I do it, and with whom? This distinction matters because the space between response and action is where situational analysis comes into play. As the art of war advises, don't fight if you can't win. The only battles worth fighting are the ones where victory is assured. And often, if you know you'll win, you won't need to fight at all. The challenge with this concept, expanding the stimulus response cycle, is that many listeners may assess it based on normal conditions and under normal circumstances. It may seem like I'm making much ado about nothing, but I'm not talking about normal days. On a good day of a good week, most of us can access our skills and capabilities, and those are different, by the way. On a bad day of a good week, fewer can access our best capabilities. On a good day of a bad week, fewer still, and on a bad day of a bad week, very few people can rise to their full potential. This is where the planning fallacy becomes relevant. Humans tend to overestimate what they can accomplish, even when past evidence shows otherwise. Research shows that people often fail to meet their goals, dismiss their failure as a fluke, and then commit to even more ambitious targets, repeating the cycle multiple times despite reminders of previous shortfalls. This planning fallacy is a cognitive bias that's often overlooked. Now, why does this matter? Because a single poor decision can undo decades of good work, and that decision doesn't come out of nowhere. The pre-stimulus phase is shaped by beliefs, habits, priming, mindset, and physiology. It creates a state of being. That state, when confronted by a stimulus, sets off a rapid chain reaction. Stimulus, reaction, response, and finally action. Each step happens in milliseconds, and at any point, emotions can take over, leading to decisions misaligned with your life vision. This is a scenario that we've all witnessed, perhaps even experienced. The fear of making one poor decision that could unravel everything we've worked for. This fear can hold us back, keep us from pushing past our upper limits. My goal in breaking this process down and deconstructing it is to highlight that the action step is the final line of defense to stop yourself from making a regrettable decision. By understanding this step and implementing the strategies we've discussed, you'll face far fewer high-stress situations. And when those moments do arise, you'll have the skills and capability to make the right action, even on a bad day of a bad week. Most of us act in what we perceive to be our best interests, given the information that we have. But in a fight or flight state, especially when triggered by a survival response, our assessment of the situation becomes flawed. Survival instincts can lead us to overestimate threats and take risks, disproportionate to the actual circumstances. Take road rage, for example. Being cut off in traffic is the stimulus. If your state of being is calm and resourceful, it may not bother you. But if you're already frazzled, that same stimulus might trigger an overreaction, honking, yelling, or making a rude gesture. You may have seen it happen with other people that you've accidentally cut off, or just watching it as a third party. At that moment, the response is just an idea. The action is what happens if they decide to act on it. And once they act, they've entered a different situation entirely. Depending on the other driver's state of being, the situation can escalate into something dangerous within seconds. Now, consider the space between response and action. If you pause to do a quick situational analysis, you might recognize that flipping someone off isn't worth the potential consequences, like another driver using their car as a weapon or escalating the encounter further. This pause creates an opportunity to implement if-then planning. If they do this, then I'll respond by doing a specific action, which could include nothing, essentially extending the pause. Let's consider a relatable example from social media: scare pranks. You've likely seen videos where someone dressed as a plant suddenly moves to frighten the passersby. Picture this: the plant jumps up, and the startled victim immediately reacts with wild antics, dropping their belongings, stumbling, and trying to run. In mere milliseconds, this entire sequence unfolds. The initial stimulus is the sudden movement of the plant. This triggers an automatic reaction of surprise, quickly escalating to fear. The response is the brain's decision: escape at all costs. Finally, the action follows a frantic attempt to flee, often resulting in comically ineffective movement as the body struggles to keep up with the mental urgency. This rapid sequence highlights how a state of being, frazzled, calm, or otherwise, can directly influence how we respond to unexpected stimuli. Now let's replay the same scare prank, but this time through the lens of a highly trained operator, a person accustomed to remaining calm and deliberate under intense pressure. Imagine the prank. The plant suddenly moves, attempting to startle. The operator, walking alongside others, registers the stimulus, the sudden movement of the plant. Here's where training takes over. At the subconscious level, instead of reacting with surprise or fear, the operator's ingrained reaction is to immediately scan for context and threat level. They remain composed, their state of being unaffected. Their autonomic nervous system might briefly engage, but through training, they can pause unnecessary adrenaline spikes. A conditioned step so they can complete the assessment. They've already figured out it's not a tiger, so now they can take a little bit more time to make the assessment. The response follows swiftly. The operator determines the movement is non-threatening, recognizes it as a prank, and decides to disengage entirely or calmly acknowledge the situation. Now, you may have seen these videos and assume that the person who's calm, walking by the frantic person, set it up, maybe lured them into that situation. And maybe that's true sometimes. But if you watch carefully, you will see some of those people, you can actually see as they are processing in milliseconds, real time, what I just now described. Take a look at them differently. Now, I want you to go to the next step and recognize that this, while it may be physical, you may be seeing it, it's not muscle memory. It's a nervous system memory. Their nervous system has been trained, probably with myelination from 0 to 7, to respond that way to intense threats. This is important because if you see how frantic they become, imagine that that's what's going on in their brain, whether it's a plant moving or unpleasant news facing them. In other words, if you're in business and you have a threat that presents itself, if you respond internally in your mind to concepts, the way that person responds to the plants, you can understand how things can unravel. And that's part of the reason for this work, is because when you learn that responding that way is a choice, and you take control of it and you learn to respond with composure, you remove a big obstacle that exists between you going after self-actualization and your purpose. Because often it's the fear that we really don't know how we're going to respond, or we don't trust ourselves to respond to our best potential. This gets back to the bad day of a bad week. You want to be able to reach your best potential even on a bad day of a bad week, and that's at the core of this work. Finally, back to the operator. Their action reflects that response. They may continue walking, making a lighthearted remark to de-escalate the situation for others, or simply stay in place unfazed by the whole thing. While the untrained victim flails, the operator's conditioned habits, and it's important that it's conditioned because it's in the milliseconds, they're rooted in deep practice and deliberate decision making, and that enables them to maintain clarity and composure. And this training can happen, as I said, in weeks, days at best, but weeks, and maybe a couple of months. The difference lies in their ability to process the same stimulus without letting it disrupt their state of being. Years of honing their stimulus response cycle with mindful interventions, stress inoculation, and myelin reinforcement have equipped them to act with precision, even in situations designed to provoke chaos. It's not about being emotionless. It's about control, acting, not reacting. Now, I mentioned that we can train this in weeks and maybe a couple of months. But the real learning occurs after that. It's deepening the practice. Just like a person can learn how to play tennis, but it might take them a year or two to learn to win, but they can play the game. And you can apply that to any sport. But again, it's not just physical, it's actually with our thoughts. So make the leap, learn the process in a month or two, and then hone it over time. So these two different approaches are often ingrained by age 27, shaping how people respond for the rest of their lives. With focused practice, it's entirely possible to rewrite that script. And this is where neuroplasticity comes into play, and especially myelin. Myelin is like the holy grail of behavior change. It breaks past paradigms. The connection between myelin and action lies in its role as the foundation for habit formation and skills performance. Myelin, the insulating layer that wraps around neural pathways, strengthens with repetition, allowing signals to travel faster and more efficiently each time we execute a behavior aligned with our life vision. Whether it's pausing to reassess in a challenging moment or implementing a thoughtful response, we lay down and reinforce myelin along the corresponding neural pathways or circuits. And this is why I say you can learn it in a month or two, but you're going to refine it and hone it over the next couple of years. Over time, this process not only makes these actions feel more natural, but also makes them more likely to occur even under stress, back to my bad day of a bad week. By deliberately focusing on the right actions, we're essentially training our brain to default to those behaviors, creating a strong, reliable framework for success in any moment. In this space between response and action, it's important to recognize that information from your subconscious is just a data point. By treating it as such, you reduce its influence and make room for conscious, deliberate assessment. Just as I've discussed reducing the power of external priming so you can strengthen your internal priming, you can reduce subconscious input to ensure that you're exercising your best thinking in any moment. By practicing and especially engaging in deep practice, you can make the desired response your go-to action. And remember, while this all makes sense with muscle memory, it's not actually muscle memory. It's nervous system memory. That is the magic of myelin. You're changing the nature of the neural pathways. Let's explore this concept further with some illustrations. Now, last week, I was talking about how we go from our state of being, which is created from our beliefs, our habits, our physiology, our priming, and our mindset. And in the prior episode, so this is number 70, we've been talking about this since 63, so you can go back there, where I spent an episode on beliefs, one on habits, one on priming, one on mindset. The physiology I didn't spend a lot of time with because there's enough written about that, but the short version is make sure you're drinking enough water so your brain gets the nutrients it needs easily. Otherwise, even slight hydration slows your blood down, and that makes it harder for the brain to get the nutrients it needs, mainly oxygen and nutrients. And it puts you in a stress response. It starts to put you in a stress response. And you can actually test this just by going for a week. As soon as you wake up, drink a half a liter of water. Just do an experiment. And note your mood, right? Note your level of brain fog or your level of clarity, whichever way you want to do it. Do that for a week, and then spend a week without drinking at all. No coffee, no nothing, for the first, say, half hour of the day. You'll notice that while you may think you need coffee or want coffee, if you just drink water, that feeling of needing coffee goes away because your brain is just starved for nutrients and is looking for the quick fix. Now, so that leads to our state of being, but because we have 30,000 plus decisions a day, this state of being becomes a habit itself. It becomes a personality, and that personality leads to how we respond to any given stimulus. This stimulus takes us to a reaction, and that could be a survival reaction. If it's a survival reaction, then you already have the cortisol, the adrenaline is already spiking. So one of the things we have to do is recognize that 99% of the threats that we face are not tigers on the Serengeti So we don't need that level. So that's literally, we condition that in, and there's a positivity exercise that I talked about that we do there. And then from reaction to response, I talked about implementation intentions. And so this, on this side, is impulse, it's the subconscious, and on this side it's thought, it's the conscious mind. Those are two different things, but because impulse, the impulse that goes through the neurons or neural pathways is energy, and thought is energy. So you can see how they have a similar signature, but there is a difference. You can actually tell once you start doing this work, you can tell when it's coming from your subconscious versus when it's coming from your conscious. And then once you can tell that, what's cool about it is there's a handoff that starts to happen in here, and it continues on to action. I'll get into another drawing in a moment. But in here, I said that you can use implementation intentions. If this happens, then I will do X. If that happens, I will do Y. If another thing happens, I'll do Z. Some of the words I threw out there, choice, we can implement or reframe. You can literally have an implementation intention where if something happens, you'll do a reframe. I used the example of if you're prone to judge people, you can condition in a step that right here that says, before I judge, let me imagine a situation that I did the same action and let me see what the situation is. It took me probably 30 seconds to say that, but we're conditioning it in at the subconscious level. Implementation intentions, we're actually telling the subconscious that before you hand this off to me, I want you to package it like this. The subconscious already does that. It's called meta programs. They package associations and then they do handoffs. Or they do handoffs to the next set of neurons. And this is when you start getting a lot of behavior. So if you think about sports, you learn a step, and then you learn another step, then you learn another step. Now you put it together. As you start putting it together, that's like a meta program. And now they can do the whole sequence with flowing without any hiccups. It's not like anything new. The subconscious already does it. We're just directing it. Instead of the subconscious doing this stuff on its own, I say up here because some people think that the subconscious is above the conscious. Instead of letting it run its thing based on what it thinks makes sense, which is got from 0 to 7, you put it as sub, which is the name says below the conscious mind, and now you're directing it. So you can direct it to give you that package. And so now instead of responding with, you stupid idiot for cutting me off, you say, oh, 8 out of 10 times when I cut somebody off was because I didn't see them. The other time was because I thought I had enough room and I misjudged their speed. So now, instead of responding that you're a stupid idiot, you have some grace because you were handed off a different version of the threat. So this is what is happening with the operator. It's already packaged. The operator's getting, it's a plant that's moving, but it looks like it's probably a person. There's no way a plant is alive like that. So that's happening in milliseconds. I said you can interrupt the pattern. It's very easy to put in a pattern interrupt. You could put in a pause, a simple pause. If I'm hit with something unfamiliar, I'm going to pause. That could be an implementation intention, and the pause is built in at the subconscious level. And that pause, it doesn't have to be even half a second. It could be a quarter of a second. Because remember, the subconscious can process at 11 million bits per second. That's what I'm saying up here. 100 billion neurons, they're firing and wiring together. They process at 11 million bits per second, whereas the conscious mind only processes at 50 bits per second. So since this processing, that's basically a million bits every tenth of a second. So if you pause for just a tenth of a second, you've got potential of a million bits of information going through. The mind can only handle 50 bits per second. But we have this thing called the reticular activating system, and that's what's coming into play here because you're now telling the reticular activating system what's important, what to let through, and how to package it. And we've all experienced the reticular activating system. If you set goals and you're going after these major goals, you get serendipity. The serendipity was always there, but the reticular activating system is making you pay attention to it. I also talked about transformational vocabulary. That's a big deal. I talked about it more in priming and mindset, but it plays here as well, so you can go back and watch one of those videos. And then guided meditation. Another good implementation intention is being proactive. So when you get this stimulus that's unfamiliar, you could prime in instantly in the subconscious side, be proactive. And so now everything is going through that filter. Hopefully you can see how this is having an impact or can have an impact on what you're doing. If we have your response, and we have action. And we said the response is the what we should do. This is the how, the when, with whom, and I might even add in why. Because the why, the reason that could be useful is that if you are following the response, and now you've done this, and now you're taking the action. You've decided to take the action. You are doing what you said you should do, what you think you should do. But the situation changes. By having the why figured out in advance, you already know when to change what you're doing. Now, action could be a lot of things. Now, by the way, I talked about skills and capabilities, and the reason I make the distinction is because a person might have the skill to, let's say a person in martial arts, they have the skills to do the forms, the katas. They can do the punches and the kicks, and they can do the whole sequence, but they've never fought another person. And now you put them in a real fight with another person. It's one thing to have the skill. It's another thing to have the capability to execute in the way that they should be executed, the timing. This is where that timing comes into play, the neural pathways, the myelination. The more a person fights, the more that timing is going to be right. This is why, fighters, they don't just throw the great fighters into other great, they build them up. They've got to get myelin. They have to build that myelin. Of course, we didn't know any of this. People didn't know any of this because myelin, it was just figured out that it was not inert, and it wasn't figured out that it actually does so much in terms of behavior until the 80s. And it wasn't until 2000 that it became a thing, because the way science works, they've got to do peer-reviewed research, and it takes time. And once there was enough research done, it was declared, yes, this is what myelin does. Myelination actually speeds up and strengthens the neural pathways, and this is directly related to habit and behavior. When you do the action, you can delay it. So what I was saying, by the way, with the skills and the capabilities, let's say that I have the ability in certain skill set, but it happens to be a bad day of a bad week. And in that bad day of a bad week, maybe again, using a sports analogy, maybe my ankle is sprained. I can't do the things that I would normally do. My situation is different, so maybe I choose not to do it. The same thing it could be. It could be you decide that you're going to flip this guy off who just cut you off, but you're surrounded in a town that you don't know. You're in a city, I should say, that you don't know anybody, and you're exposed, and there's crowds of people around, and you're going to flip this guy off in that situation. You've got to be able to assess what are the capabilities. You may know how to fight, but do you have the capability to take on what can possibly happen? And you don't even know what could possibly happen. So I have the 4 Ds. You can delay it, you can dump it, you can do it, you can delegate it. I can go further than that, but just use this as an example that when you get this handoff from response to action and you're going through the how will I do it, when will I do it, with whom and why, think of it as you want the subconscious to give you some suggestions of, should I delay it, should I dump it, should I do it, or should I delegate it? Now, I've talked a couple of times about giving your subconscious directions. Some of you may be thinking that's out there, it's woo-woo. Nothing that I talk about is woo-woo. I can explain it all without having to resort to woo-woo. I explain it in terms of milliseconds in the neural pathways, synaptogenesis, myelin. Sometimes I'll slip into talking about epigenetics, like spontaneous remission. I mean, you've got to look at how genes operate in order to get there. But I look at it in terms of, beliefs, priming, so I can break it all down that way. So as an example, public speaking is a big fear. I've seen it written, most of you have seen it written, that public speaking is the number one fear. Sometimes it's even higher on the list than death. And I've been told, or it's been suggested that one of the reasons why fear of speaking is so high is because in our, going way back, hunter-gatherer, and even times after that, speaking up in front of the tribal leader or in front of the king could get you killed. They said that's probably why the public speaking fear is so high, but whatever it is. So here's a little thing that you can do when it comes to removing your fear of public speaking. So first of all, if you break down why people are afraid of public speaking as an adult in a rational mind, it's probably having to do with, I don't want to be caught without and knowing what I'm supposed to say. I don't want to forget my line, so they have the note cards. I don't want to, say something that's incorrect and be criticized, whatever it is. When I first started looking at public speaking, the people who were teaching me talked about getting your butterflies flying information. They said everyone has butterflies, but the point is you want to get yours flying information. And what's also interesting is the first few seconds of a talk is when you're most likely to fall into fight or flight. So this is why some people say memorize your opening, because if you memorize and rehearse your opening, do it over and over and over. If you do that, then while your nervous system is most on edge, you get through that, and now you can function a little bit better. That's why sometimes if you've ever been speaking and somebody throws a monkey wrench in right at the very beginning, it may be harder for you to have a clean start. They also say memorize and rehearse over and over the ending, the closing, because you want to get that right. Again, your energy is up high. So I've said before that excitement and anxiety can have a similar signature, and excitement can often trigger anxiety type neurons because of that. But if you can distinguish between the two and see that at the end of the talk you may be excited because it went well and now you're getting excited, but that could be seen as anxiety. Next thing you know, you start getting fight or flight feelings or symptoms, and so you may rush through the close. This is why you want to rehearse the close. Now this is before knowing all of this stuff about myelin and neural pathways and all that. Now that you know that, you can actually box the thing and have implementation intentions. There's different ways that you can do it. You can manage it. But here's something that can get you through. So if someone asks you to speak about something on the spur of the moment, calls you out in an audience, could be a big fear that people have. Here's a 1, 2, 3 step formula that you can actually practice. And I want you to practice it now, not to become a better speaker, but I want you to experience what it feels like. I want you to experience how the subconscious can hand off information to the conscious mind. So I want you to get real time with me, preferably not driving. You don't have to close your eyes or anything. I want you to just use your imagination. Yeah, so you shouldn't be driving, obviously. But imagine you're sitting in a crowded room. Let's say the number is higher than whatever your comfort level is. Some people are comfortable in a room of 5. Some people are comfortable in a room of 500. So something above your comfort threshold. You're in a room and there's more people in there than your comfort threshold. And the speaker says, and I have someone in the audience that I want to ask and have them talk about, I want you to talk about automobiles. John, stand up and tell us your thoughts about automobiles. Imagine you being John or Jane, and you're asked to speak in this room of hundreds of people, and they're asking you to talk about automobiles. What do you say? Imagine yourself. How would you form your words? What would you start off with? What's the first thing out of your mouth? How does this go on? What does it feel like in the second minute as you get into the second minute of this impromptu talk? What are your points that you're making? What's some of the things you're saying? And now you sit down. How do you feel about that performance? Now you literally, I'm asking you to think through this. How do you feel about that performance? Now, I'm going to give you some tips. Come back to just, mindfulness, presence right here, and give you some instructions, and I want you to apply these instructions. The first thing you want to do when somebody calls on you to speak, and you're not, whether you're expecting it or not, the first thing I want you to do is come up with a position statement. And the way you're going to come up with the position statement is you're going to look into your subconscious. You're not going to come up with your position statement with your conscious mind. Conscious mind is too slow. We want the subconscious to give it. So we are literally telling the reticular activating system, check the subconscious and give me my position statement. If you've ever fallen off of some high item and you feel like your life has flashed before your eyes, that's sort of what we're tapping into. After it gives you the position statement, I want you to state the position statement with authority. Because it's your position statement, it came from your subconscious. It's your best thinking up to that moment, or your best information that you have, because it's already assessed from your subconscious. And it only takes milliseconds. Then I want you to have it give you 3 compelling evidence points. And I want you to start speaking when you get the first evidence point, because you know the second and third ones will be there. Then, after the third evidence point, if you have to keep speaking, instruct it to continue giving you evidence points in groups of 3s. Now, let's go through that thing again. So you're sitting there in this room that's bigger than what you would be comfortable speaking in front of. Go into state, you're in the room, and someone says, John, I want you to talk about automobiles. The first thing I want you to do is, what's your position statement about automobiles? Whatever it is. It could be you like electric vehicles, you think that internal combustion engines should be the right thing, you prefer SUVs. It could be anything. What is your position statement? That's yours. Go inside, listen for your position statement. It probably already came up. Whatever comes up is it. Go with that. Now ask it for 3 evidence points to back up that position. Go inside. I need 3 evidence points. And then as you speak, once you do this a few times, it's automatic. You'll keep getting evidence points. But now let's do it real time again. Let's practice. I want you to do it. This audience is very interested in artificial intelligence. Why don't you talk about artificial intelligence? What's your position statement? 3 evidence points. 3 more evidence points. Do that a few times, and you will never fear being called on again. I don't care how big the group is. And if you're ever speaking to a group and they say, hey, so-and-so, the next speaker is late. Can you kind of continue for another 15 minutes? Sure. Just come up with a position statement in your mind. What's related to this topic that I really want to talk about right now? I feel strongly about. What's my position statement? Milliseconds. You know what? Related to this, boom, throw out a position statement, and now your evidence points just keep coming. And what you can do is you can then take that position statement and parse it down into smaller position statements and just keep repeating this. You can take a talk and go from 2 minutes to 2 hours if you have to, just doing this by jumping into the next position statement, jumping into the next position statement. That's similar to what I do with these episodes when I do a series. I allow my position statements to unfold and I choose them, and then I pick the ones I want to talk about. So that was a lot. Again, this is the 8th in a series. If you're interested in this, I'm doing a master class January 7th at 7 a.m. Pacific time. I'll post it on my LinkedIn profile. You'll also see it if you're following me on whatever Facebook page you might be watching this on. It's also there. And I'll do a video and publish it as a RSS feed in the podcast. January 7th, it's Breakthrough 2025, and it's a way for you to crush your goals in 2025 and the rest of your life and building a life design that you'll love living with extended Q&A. It's live Q&A and breakout sessions and doing exercises so people can experience it. And we're going to go through each step, belief to habit, and we'll do the myelination thing to priming to mindset. We won't talk much about physiology. There's enough written about that. And then we'll go into state of being and how to adjust your state of being, stimulus, reaction, response, action, and we'll finish up with the emotional modulation, which is what I'll talk about next week, because sometimes we're not in an emotional state. That's back to the skills and capabilities. We're not in an emotional state. We're being triggered. So I hope to see you. January 7th, masterclass. I'll post it on LinkedIn and my Facebook pages. It's a masterclass, and I'll provide resources that you can take with you, and we'll finish it up with a design example, how you can design your life to take a lot of this into consideration. It's a template that you can use again and again as you design your pivots going through life. All right, that's it. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.